Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Bobrovsky. I am the president of Lighthouse Integrations. We do some cybersecurity and IT consulting. And for October, the Cyber Awareness Month, we've been bringing in some guest speakers, some people that I know quite well that help me out all the time. And today we're lucky enough to have Vernon D'Souza join us. And the more I read about this stuff every day, take training, and the more you learn about this stuff, the more that you realize there's a lot to learn. And every time I have a conversation with Vernon, I seem to walk away with sweaty palms and a whole new respect for what's actually going on out there. So without further ado, this is Vernon. He's got a deck to share with us. And Vernon, tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that you've been doing recently and sort of some of the things you've been seeing on there.
Yeah, sure. So before I share the deck, we'll just chat about sort of where we are in the state of the world right now. There's a lot of geopolitical issues around the world. There's a lot of hacking groups out there. There's a lot of individuals. There's a lot of government, state entities as well who are part of this big, I guess, attacks that are going on around the world. And that's sort of what we're seeing, right? Everybody's fighting each other. Everybody's going after each other. Everybody's politically driven or driven by, financial means. So it's the worst I think it's ever been. And it's also the most amount of attacks we've ever seen. And it's the most easiest in terms of creating and generating new attacks. The interesting piece is, with cloud services, there's new launching platforms, there's more IPs, there's more attack vectors, there's different ways to hit people nowadays. So throw that into social media. Everybody's active on there in terms of free applications, mobile applications, work from home. Everything's remote now. The attack surface just keeps growing. And that is excluding IoT and OT. So when you throw in OT, which is more in terms of engineering, manufacturing, mining, all of that fun stuff and like critical infrastructure, and then you have IoT, which are all the sensors and smart devices that people have at homes or in the offices or everywhere, that landscape has just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So that's what I see on a daily basis, is people hitting everything 24/7. And the big question is, how do we stop that? And the answer is, you really can't. So the two recommendations I can make right off the bat is, in terms of your industry, just don't be at the bottom of your industry. So if you're in manufacturing, pharma care, healthcare, whatever it might be, just be a little bit better than sort of the companies that are part of your industry. So if you're the weakest link, they're going to go after you. If you're a little bit stronger, they're going to give up and just go after the weakest company. So that's the easiest piece. I know it's not what people want to hear. And then the second piece is,
but that's a great point. And I say that all the time, that it's not about stopping them, because you're not going to. But if you can, kick them down the road a little bit by just being, don't be an easy target. And that's not a defense, but it's a reality, because they're not. There's so many opportunities out there for them to go after. Why would they waste time on you unless they're motivated? And in most cases, especially when you start getting into, most of the people that'll be listening to this are small to medium business owners. There's things you can do to not be an easy target, and hopefully that'll fend off a lot of, what's going on out there.
Exactly. And the second piece of information is, assume that at one point you will be compromised. So this is ensuring you have an incident response plan in place. You do tabletop exercises, your team's aware, you have cyber insurance, you have a backup plan. Assume that at some point you will get breached, and just figure out how you're going to deal with it and how you're going to action it. So that's sort of the two highlights. And now we can sort of jump into a few pieces of information I would love to share. So to kick this off, again, how many times in a month, in a week, in a day do you see that someone's been breached? It's pretty much constant. This morning, I saw an article that, the Wall Street Journal was breached, right? And it's going to continue and continue. So I'm personally sick of seeing this 24/7 everywhere. So it's now just part of our daily lives, right? This company's compromised, that company's compromised. And again, I want to talk about the threat actors. So again, who exactly is responsible for this? So I mentioned, nation states. I don't want to mention any specific countries, but we all know who they are. We have hacktivist groups. Again, don't want to name any because we know who they are. We have cyber criminals, we have terrorist groups, we have political actors, we have thrill seekers as well, which is interesting because you have individuals and also smaller groups as well. So they're not necessarily part of a bigger organization. They're not activists. They just do it for fun. And then you have insider threat as well, which is a growing sort of attack vector right now. So you have disgruntled employees. I know a big thing in tech companies is that there are a lot of third-party contractors and third-party services companies that get admin access, are responsible for data migration, a lot of items, and that's where a lot can go wrong as well. So understanding, if you are using a third party, even if you're small to medium business, what does that exactly look like in terms of the contractors or the third parties that you're hiring or the IT services company that you're working with? So in terms of threat actors, this is the big group. And then in terms of the targeted side of things as well, so you have mass untargeted attacks. So, they just throw out an attack in the wild, it sticks where it sticks, it goes where it goes, it's a big net, and those are the criminals, and all they care about is just financial means, right? They want to hit you with ransomware, they want to extort, blackmail, all that fun stuff. That's their goal, that's their bread and butter. I've actually built services and a full department for that. In terms of, when you're working with a hacking group that's compromised a small to medium business or even a large entity, and there's ransomware being spread, there's a number, there's an email address, they provide professional services to help remediate and recover your data. There's actually customer support. So that's the funny end on the sort of mass targeted side of things.
It's pretty well organized now. Like it's funded very well, and now it's turned into like ransomware as a service is actually a thing.
Exactly. You can go on the dark web, you can buy these packages, you can work with them. They'll actually, you split the profits with them, they take care of everything. So it's a forming business. And in my opinion, it's a multi-billion-dollar business right now. And it's just going to go up from here. And then on the far right side, which is more targeted, you have disgruntled employees, and they can do a lot of damage very quickly as well. So, one of the recommendations is really hone in on your offboarding procedures. If you have, admins and critical resources who have access to a lot of stuff and you're going to let them go, or if there's any issues within the business, really figure out how you're going to address that immediately and pull their access or monitor their access. A lot of companies fail on that front, and that's what really bites them pretty badly. And it could just be by a mistake as well. Just a few days ago, what was it? I believe Microsoft Azure Blob Storage was exposed with a whole bunch of their customer data. I think it was like a few 100,000 records of information was supposedly leaked, and they're still trying to figure out what the root cause was, how much information was leaked. It didn't contain any direct customer data, but it was more of their partnership details and contracts and agreements that Microsoft actually has. So, this has happened to Amazon as well. It happens to everybody. So it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to have to face it at some time. So this is just the spectrum of threat actors. In terms of how they attack now, this is the real fun stuff. So in my experience, again, phishing is still number one, right? They make it look really good. Email filters still suck, right? You can tune them, configure them as much as you want. It comes to the end user at the end of the day. If they're not having a good day, if it just slips through it and they just click it and they enter any information, you're kind of hooped. So what I've also noticed is that, they're also targeting personal emails. So for example, if I know that I cannot hit you with your corporate accounts, right? And if I can compromise your personal account and then somehow blackmail you or extort you to then get access to your corporate environment, or if, say, for example, you have personal information on your work computer and you open up your email and I hit you there and I still phish you on your personal email, I can still compromise, your entire corporate devices. And the funny thing about this is that C-levels are actually the worst at this. They let their kids, their family members, anybody touch their cell phones, their tablets, and their work computers. And that's been a big pain in my butt for the longest time, which is don't let people touch your devices, because if you're a C-level and you have access to everything and you're letting your kids install like TikTok on your work phone, Snapchat, all these other third parties or these free photo editing software, right, on your tablet, or even I've seen free games installed on a corporate device just because like you want the kid to be quiet. And it's like, here, play with this on vacation for like 2 hours, and they'll just go in and install everything because they have admin, right? That's the other issue, is that, you know, you'll give these C-levels admins to their machines, and with Windows, it's not going to authenticate and just say, hey, okay, let's install this, or a browser plugin or whatnot. So they get crafty. And that's my biggest concern, is you have to be aware of absolutely everything when it comes to phishing emails. So it's not just personal, it's corporate, and it's not even personal, it's also extended family and your family members as well. So not a lot of people think about that. In my experience, when I wanted to hit a C-level, I never went after them directly. I went after their family members. And because it's easy, right? One of the funny things is, for a large you know, multi-billion-dollar company, they put so much security in terms of the C-level for protecting their travel plans, their flight details, you know, how they get from point A to point B, all that stuff. And then you'll see their kids post where they are and take photos with GPS coordinates and everything. And they'll actually sometimes even tag their parents in there. And it's like, you know, you're putting so much emphasis on focusing this one person, but you forget about the people around them.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of useless from that perspective. And that's always fun, right? When you can prove to a C-level that, you know, you can get to them through their family, and then that really scares them. Then obviously the second most biggest one right there is ransomware. So malicious files. Again, this is, how do you receive the files, right? It's through emails, it's through being uploaded. If, say, for example, it's within a automatic workflow with Salesforce, or any billing or CRM or anything like that, or even HR, for example, through resumes. You know, if you accept Word or PDF, we can preload those with malware. So it's not just, you know, your traditional, hey, I'm getting an email. It's all the workflows you have for your organization as well that we can hit. And then again, you're relying on a lot of third-party services to say, for example, you assume that they're verifying or vetting the files that you're getting, but they're not. Right? It's just, they upload it and then you directly download it. And then once you open it, there's no security intelligence, there's no screening, there's nothing there. Right. So having it on your actual workstations, security there is really important. Getting people to actually manually click the file, say scan with whatever endpoint security you have, and then that's extra insurance right there. So that's another tip, which is actually just enforce that any of your employees you have to manually scan the files before they open them. So don't trust anything. Again, a big pain point for me are free tools and phone apps. People don't like paying for software, and phone apps are readily available. So I'm not sure how comfortable people are. All I can say is I don't trust TikTok, and I don't think a lot of people should either. There's proof, there's evidence, there's a lot out there. That's just my opinion. So I would say stay away from that, especially from your corporate devices. Please let your IT team sleep at night. So just avoid any of that on corporate devices. Like, I can take an application, easily load it with malware or ransomware, and then get you to download it from me, right, via a link, or even compromise your device, or even create a fake app store, and then you're hooped. So I just want people to be aware of that. And that's what hackers do when they're doing like a nation state level or a targeted attack. The other interesting piece is compromised hardware. There've been attacks in the past where, you know, these groups have actually breached and compromised the manufacturing facilities and preloaded malware right on the actual device that you get. So you assume it's brand new. It's not. It's actually preloaded at the factory. Cell phones, same thing. USB keys. There was a story out there a few years ago regarding IBM USB keys being compromised as well. The other big thing is when you're at a tech event, all those free devices that they give you, they could easily be preloaded as well. And these organizations don't know because they buy it, you know, from wholesale or whoever's cheaper. You don't know what's on there, right? Yeah. And it's super easy to load that on there. So again, keep that in mind.
And I guess
the other,
as you're saying that, Vernon, one of the things, you know, sure, we're only in October, but you can see the Christmas lights are starting to come out. Everything that you're saying right now, Christmas time, you know, with all the sort of home, smart home devices that get out there, everybody just pulls them out of the box, sticks them on their network, and away you go.
Exactly. Which reminds me, so some of the attacks I've actually done in the past is we go buy some really nice gifts. Like I'm talking iPhones, new tablets, laptops. We'll take them, put in actually like physical hardware backdoors and even software backdoors, reseal them, and then give them to people as like, hey, you want a gift from one of your vendors. And then you assume, oh, look, I just got a new iPad, great, right? And then now we have a backdoor to you. So that's the other thing to consider as well. Watch out where you get those free gifts from, because if you're being targeted, we're gonna get you. Doesn't matter. um, and now the big thing is DDoS attacks. With what's going on in the world, we've seen a massive uptick of that. And these DDoS attacks have so much bandwidth, and the network is so big, it's even hard to block, even if you have a third-party service provider like front-ending you. So that's another big concern.
Yeah, I guess with
brute force.
And most companies now are relying so heavily on web services or anything like that to be able to just function day to day that would bring them to their knees almost as effectively as like ransomware, right?
Exactly. And then extortion saying, hey, pay this or we're going to continue. And you never know when it's going to happen. So that's the tricky part with DDoS. A lot of retail customers have seen a massive uptick in brute forcing attacks as well, and credential stuffing. So this is where, it's not more applicable to small to medium, but more in terms of if you're a consumer, just be aware that, large online retailers do suffer from this. So one thing I would recommend is like create temporary email accounts. Apple does a great job of doing that. And then say, for example, create a unique email address for each of your online retailers. So if you see anything funky or strange, you just compromise that one email and you know what it's for, right? So you're not compromising your full personal identity, so to speak. So that's just a little 2 cents there. Another big thing we've seen is websites and social media attacks. So, malicious posts on LinkedIn, on Instagram, fake ads as well as a big business for getting people to click, not only to generate ad revenue, but also anything malicious in the back end as well, or free applications, compromised websites as well, hosting different applications and different links. So that's another easy thing is, I can go and compromise a website that's legitimate, but it's hosting something malicious. I get you to go to that legitimate website and then you download that malicious item, and then there you go. File sharing services as well is very popular, but again, you don't know what you're downloading. You don't know what's being shared. I think for me, the personal kind of attack is when it's an on-site assessment or I'm building a piece of hardware or a device to send to somebody that's fully compromised. So for example, we can load malware on e-cigarette chargers. We can load malware on docking stations and actually have a physical backdoor on a docking station, or even like the splitters as well. There's also backdoors and like physical backdoors you can have on a cable that just looks like your regular iPhone cable as well. So you really have to be wary of what you get from where and how you use things and what you're plugging into your corporate machines. And then if this wasn't bad, the worst is if you're being targeted. No matter what, they're going to get it. They can spend months, weeks, years. They can throw as much money as possible to get at you if they want to. So that's why we say just assume that you're going to get breached.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how they attack. It's very interesting. In terms of the challenges as well. So these are the 3 ways that security sort of doesn't work nowadays. Number 1 is using identities to protect your network. Identity is a big topic, and having a username and password no longer cuts it, right? If I compromise that, I can just go right through the network, right? If I compromise a admin username password, if I phish them, I'm going right through the network and getting domain access instantly. So keep that in mind, is that a username and password is no longer safe. Even if you have a 24-character string password, if I phish you, it doesn't matter. It's not going to do anything to protect your network. And the other piece is, single-factor authentication as well. So that's the other item to keep in mind. software isolation as well. So, the amount of software that you have on an endpoint, if I compromise your local host, I'm going to jump into everything as well. So having different passwords for different pieces of software and different web portals, and items outside of your network as well. So for example, cloud applications, SaaS applications, integrations as well. You need to figure out what your whole identity picture looks like for all your third-party services and all your SaaS applications, on-prem, cloud, hybrid, all of that fun stuff. You need to figure out what your identity strategy is, because the old way of things just don't work anymore.
Yeah, so could you elaborate a little bit on that, Vernon? Because one of the things that I hear all the time is, we don't have anything on our network, so we're all cloud-based. We're relying on third parties, so inherently we're secure. What are some of the, how do we put that to rest to say, if I've got your identity, I've got access to everything you have access to. So it's not like I have to find a different way to go through. I'm using legitimate methods to get to the same stuff that you have access to. So what are some of the things that you see out there, or is that common? Do you hear that a lot?
I hear that a lot, which is, our corporate network is very minimal, right? We have a firewall, we have a laptop, everything else is cloud-based. What does that mean? Everything else is cloud-based, everything is SaaS. If I were to compromise, say, for example, your set of credentials, I've then compromised all your SaaS applications, depending how it's configured, depending if multi-factor authentication is there and how that's set up as well. Now, if I were to, say, for example, compromise your endpoint, your laptop, then you're logging into everything, you're doing everything, I can see all of that, right? If I have access to your device, I have access to those sessions as well. I can log in, I have everything, I have all access that you have access to. So that's the old sort of mentality and the old way of doing things, where the new model, which I'm going to talk about, is zero trust. So this is where you have sort of security around every single component of absolutely every single thing, and it all correlates, it all talks to each other, and you have to sort of authenticate and validate that it is you for absolutely everything. And that's the new security model that I would recommend to a lot of organizations. So again, what can we do? I had to put this in here. I don't always think about cybersecurity, but when I do, it's usually too late.
Exactly.
And for large organizations, that's the big thing, right? The budget always gets approved after a breach, right? It's always after the fact. So the one thing we can do is be proactive, and it's all about managing risk, right? Small and medium organizations have to manage risk differently because their scope is different, their landscape is different, their priorities are different, which I'm going to talk about. So you don't have to do everything, you just have to focus, but just be proactive about everything else as well. So just in case you do start maturing, as you get up that maturity ladder, you know what your next step is, you know what your plan is, you have a 3-year roadmap, you're not caught blindsided, right? You know where your weaknesses are, and then you have a plan to address them. The worst thing is not knowing where your weaknesses are. So when you do get hit, you're scrambling and you're like, oh, am I going to go out of business tomorrow? That's the last thing that we want you to think about.
Yeah, in cybersecurity, on that point, Vernon, cybersecurity is not a project. It's a way of doing business, right? It's an iterative thing where you have to keep reevaluating your risk, and your risk does change over time, and your risk tolerance changes over time. So as long as you're, if you're ever wondering whether your IT, managed service partner or whatever is thinking about cyber, they need to have those risk conversations with you. And if they're not, they're probably not, kind of forward thinking on the cyber and being proactive. So, it's all about this kind of ongoing process, maturing, thinking about the next stage of it and planning ahead.
That's exactly it. And just to get people to understand sort of what their threat landscape might be, is to figure out what your assets are. And I like to start with your data assets, because that's the most important piece for any organization. So you have this merger between physical assets and digital. And you need to understand what that looks like for you. So for example, some companies still use USBs, they still have local backups on a hard drive. Then you have your main working device, which might be a desktop. In most cases, it's a laptop. Then you have, your phone, which contains absolutely everything. You have your MFA tokens, you have your password, you have email, you have everything on your phone. And then you have your messaging apps as well, which link all the information back and forth. And then you have that bridge between on-prem private cloud, public cloud, and SaaS applications. So this is your full landscape. And it's hard for organizations to understand, first of all, what data do they have and where does it live throughout all these devices for you as an organization. So understanding what your data strategy is really important, especially with GDPR maturing, other countries as well coming up with their own privacy standards. Canada ourselves are maturing, the US is maturing, each state's going to mature as well, just like the state of California. So what does that strategy look like for you, right? If you're small and you operate within a country, great. As soon as you start processing information or having customers internationally, you're kind of hooped unless you know what you're liable for and what does your contracts, agreements, and all that fun stuff looks like. So that's why I put this in here. It's because you really need to understand your data strategy. And then this is that important piece for organizations to understand, no matter what size you are, is what do you need to protect, right? This is where that zero trust piece comes into play, which is you have the identity of a user, you have the endpoints, you have the actual data, then you have your applications. If you're a customer who has some infrastructure, maybe in the cloud, hybrid, it's self-hosted or whatnot, you need to think about the infrastructure and the network as well. And zero trust encompasses all of these pieces individually. And this is where you have the visibility, the automation, and the orchestration. So everything's talking to each other, everything has open communication, and it all has configured policies. So for example, if the identity passes, the endpoint passes, but the data itself, the user's not authorized to use it, you're not going to get access to it. So it's going to fail there. So that's a quick understanding of zero trust. And again, this is all regarding your risk, right? If you're small to medium, right, and you can only pick two, I would say pick identity and endpoint and work on the data strategy, right? Easy as that. And that's probably like 12 to 24 months worth of work just right there off of those three things. And again, the current state is I have this closed cage, I have this corporate network. The amount of times I've heard corporate network and everything lives within the corporate network drives me nuts because the corporate network is worldwide now. Everybody's working from home. It's global, it's everywhere. So that's why we need zero trust and for security to live within all those components and all of it to talk to each other and for you to have a central policy because we don't work from the corporate office anymore. We work from coffee shops, we work from airports, hotel rooms, anywhere and everywhere. We're working off of phones, mobile devices, VDI, cloud infrastructure, SaaS applications like Oracle or even Salesforce. That's all part of your corporate environment now, and you need to figure out a central strategy. And this is why zero trust is so important. The guiding principles, again, I like what you mentioned before, which is, security is ever changing and it's a lifelong thing for an organization. And again, zero trust is just a strategy and part of that. It's not a product, it's not a service, it's an approach to design and implement these security principles based on your risk, right? Based on what you need and when you need it by. So again, verify everything, right? We want to verify the user. We want to verify even the location of said user. There's a lot of funky things you can do, but everything's talking to each other is pretty much the simple piece there. Least privilege as well. So again, just give somebody access in terms of what they need. If they need additional access, you want to elevate it. You can have other people also approving their access as well. So that's another important piece, and it's only for that certain time frame. This is really important when it comes to if you own a SaaS application, if you're building a SaaS application, if you're heavy into the cloud and you have workloads and you have a dev team and whatnot, this is where we can get really deep into it and just figuring out what your workflows look like. And then my favorite, assume a breach. At some point, you will get breached. It's okay. It happens to everybody. And just have a plan. So that's the guiding principles in terms of zero trust. And again, it all goes back to data. So again, figure out if it's public data, if it's internal data, figure out your classification strategy, figure out if it's low sensitivity, high sensitivity, and work from there in terms of your data strategy. I love this slide. It just simplifies everything in one snapshot for you to visually understand what best practices are based on. I really like this as well because this is data lifecycle management, but this encompasses absolutely everything within your corporate ecosystem or environment. So this goes not only for data, but for example, device management, for identity management, for anything within your organization. So everything gets created, everything gets consumed, right, within either third parties, internally, partner companies, or whatever. You share information as well back and forth. You process information depending on your workstation, your laptop, and the cloud SaaS application. You store said data and you delete it, right? This encompasses pretty much anything in IT. And the two key components of this is access and authorization. So access is, can I access said information, right? Like, can I read, can I write? And then the other piece is, am I authorized to do so, right? What governs my access to this, right? Is it a policy? Is it a procedure? Do I have the right permission levels? Do I have to go, say, for example, ask my director, manager, approver, whatever that might look like, right? And that goes hand in hand in sort of management of anything regarding IT. So to wrap things up, my 3 recommendations to sort of protect yourselves against what's out there, and especially for small to medium companies, is, again, lock down that endpoint, work on GRC, so governance, risk, and compliance, and figure out what your cloud strategy or what cloud means to you as an organization. In terms of your endpoint for device risk, device management is really important, right? This is patching, this is updates, this is Windows, Linux, Mac, whatever you have. What does that device management look like? This includes disk encryption. This includes like remote wipe. This includes absolutely everything with device management. The biggest thing you can, I guess the worst thing you can deal with is, say, for example, you're a small to medium business, one of your employees has a whole bunch of information on the laptop. You know what the information is. The laptop gets stolen or they lose it, and your hard drive is not encrypted. How are you going to report that to the privacy commissioner? How are you going to deal with remediation? Is cyber insurance going to cover you? What does that cleanup look like? Now, if your device, say, for example, was encrypted, you have proof that, hey, we went in, we remotely wiped it, you disclose the incident, you have evidence that it was remediated, you're done within hours versus dealing with a breach and a lawsuit that can last years, right? I've dealt with so many of those in my lifetime that I don't want to look at any of those again, where it's simple device management, back to basics. Other piece is threat detection, right? Like endpoint security, simple as that. Get something good, get something that's easy to manage, get something that can remediate items quickly. Simple as that as well. And then the third piece is backups, secure backups. Make sure they're not on USBs, make sure they're not on like hardware that can fail. Make sure the backups are fully segregated, separate. Hackers can't get to it as well, because what's good of having a backup if we can also hit that with ransomware. So figuring out a good backup strategy that makes sense for you is really important. Easy quick tip is when you're using OneDrive with Microsoft, there's actually features there where you can set like this is more on the enterprise level, like backup cadences, and the fact that if, say, for example, your OneDrive was to get hit with ransomware, can actually block it from encrypting items as well, especially with Azure storage and Azure Blob storage. So there's a lot of funky, cool things you can do with O365 that I love. It's easy to use. The other piece is user risk. So this is that MFA, enable it for everything, goes back to identity. Training is one of the best things you could possibly do. If you can train the individual to be more proactive and more aware, not only are they going to be better at their roles, but they're actually going to train other people and make your company more secure. So I believe that's really undervalued, and you gotta keep updating them, right? I say the weakest link is the employee, right? That they're the weakest link in your firewall. So you got to keep updating them constantly. You have to update your iPhone like 20 times a month. You got to update your employees as well. And then the other piece is access control. Again, figuring out what does that look like to you? Should they have admin privileges? What access levels are you going to give them? What permissions? All that fun stuff. Now for risk governance and compliance, one of the key things is cyber insurance, and we've seen that pretty much increase drastically year over year over year. I remember, 10 years ago, you can get a policy for like pennies on the dollar. It was super cheap. The industry wasn't mature. They'd give it to anybody. And then we have this big bang of all these compromises and everything. And now they're validating, they're vetting, they're confirming, they're doing their own assessments, they're scanning your external infrastructure, they want to do spot checks, right? The policy in terms of filling out the information is a lot more, and they're very costly, right? The premiums are high, and if you were to suffer something, it's hard to prove you're doing what you're saying that you're doing.
Yeah, and I've seen in that space as well, Vernon, just to add to that, is because the whole landscape, they were, I mean, the insurers were learning as they went too, right? And with the, with ransomware, it was kind of one funded the other, created the bigger, the brewing of the perfect storm. And you were seeing a lot of the changes in the policies to be able to see what you can cover. So just like any other insurance, you got to make sure that you understand what you are covered for and what is your responsibility to be able to be covered for that. And like you say, it used to be, the owner could fill out a checklist and you get cyber insurance, but now they're actually looking for it. And if you do get breached and you said you did something and you aren't, then you're not covered. So you really have to be careful with that. It is a great thing to have for those areas where there's risk that you want to manage through insurance, but you have to be careful with that as well.
Exactly. And there's different stipulations as well, right? For example, there's like network protection, there's SaaS application protection, there's also device protection, there's server protection, there's also like phishing and social engineering. Those are different clauses as well, and different coverages and different premiums. So you really need to understand what you're getting. And like you said, are you doing what you actually say that you're doing when you check that box? Next piece is management support. This would be more applicable for medium-sized companies. So if you're, a director or a manager, making sure that, you have support from the organization themselves. Budgeting is really important as well. So looking at, again, 12 months, 24 months, that 3-year roadmap, and having a rough idea of what your spend might look like. It's going to change drastically. But if you have an idea of what your risks are, what your goals are, and what the budget might be, it's nice knowing versus not knowing. So that's another proactive tip. In terms of, again, corporate environment risk, remote access. So what does that look like? Everybody's working from home. What does that footprint look like for you, right? Even a small to medium business, what does that look like? Having an edge network, again, right? Some companies are moving to a cloud firewall or a virtual firewall, having that edge network. So if a user is not, say in the office, if they're at home, they can still connect through your edge network. So the traffic is safe and secure, and you're not relying on their home Wi-Fi or the coffee shop or the airport's internet, right? That the edge network is really important there. And then layered security, right? Having the edge, having the endpoint, having the device management, throwing zero trust, protecting the identity, all of that is that big layered approach. And that's what stops hackers versus just throwing something and seeing what sticks at the wall. And having your strategy and playing off of that is really important. And then the cloud is a big mess of things. Again, it's not going to be more applicable to the small to medium business, but if you're a medium company and you're a tech company and you're starting off, this is where, and you have a cloud environment, configuration management is really important for your workloads, for your servers, for your microservices, whatever you might have, whatever you're building, whatever the third parties might be working on for you as well. What does that look like? Data security and backups, again, a big thing. That's why hackers love compromising, SaaS applications or anybody in the cloud. It's because if it can hit your production and if it can hit your backup, I own you, right? There's no price that's too high that you won't pay. And then network segmentation as well. So figuring out what does the front end look like versus the back end? How are the databases talking to each other? How, for example, your API keys are working. All of that fun stuff comes in terms of segmentation, and that's segmentation for your entire stack of what you're building in the cloud. Again, access, we go to least privilege. Again, this is not only from a user level, but also from a application level in terms of the services that you have and the APIs that you have as well. So everything needs to be least privileged, and look at what your encryption looks like and what your key policy is and what your key rotation is. All that fun stuff falls under there. And then again, just-in-time access or conditional access is really important as well, and that falls into zero trust. And then policy enforcement for absolutely everything encompassing the cloud. So in short, that's sort of the 3 key recommendations. And again, never trust and just always verify seems to work for anything in life. So we should also do that for IT. And my last piece is, we can do better all together. So that's the last piece of my advice.
Yeah, Vernon, and you're always a wealth of knowledge. I don't know if I get excited or nervous when I talk to you, but either way, it's fun. And there is no silver bullet to any of this stuff. Education is, it's the root of everything. And as you mentioned, assume breach. Something's going to happen. I mean, you could have the best defense in the world, and somebody can click on the wrong thing, or you may be targeted and you don't even know. All of those things. You can't make this stuff up on the fly. You have to be proactive, be ahead of it, and do what you can, and don't be an easy target. I think those are my takeaways from your discussion, although there was a ton more of good stuff in there, and I'd love to just keep the conversation going. Is there anything else that you want to just sort of emphasize to everybody?
I think us as being Canadians, we're targeted the most, I would want to say, because we're easy targets in cyberspace, right? I mean, the central government's capabilities are very minimal. RCMP's capabilities are very minimal. We have a lot of R&D. We have a big footprint in the world in terms of R&D and research and tech as well. A lot of the incidences that I've dealt with in the past are also with universities as well. So, there's a lot of research being done there. So I just want everybody to be aware that, we are being targeted on a global scale, right? Every country out there is taking a crack at us. So if you're a Canadian organization, just try to do a little bit better is all I can ask for. Be proactive and just know that that's what's going on in the landscape. And there are a lot of threat actors out there. So just protect your IP and go from there.
Yeah, and I guess, at the end of the day, it's not something that's simple. You've covered off so much stuff, but you're just touching the tip of the iceberg. There's so much to do. If people don't know where to get started, I'm always up for a coffee. I know you're always readily available whenever you can outside of your busy travel schedule and speaking engagements. But knowledge is everything. So reach out to somebody who's been there, done that, get some help, and even if you get a kickstart, it goes a long way. So. Vernon,
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're going to have another one because, like I said, I really enjoy these conversations. We're just doing the webinars to support the awareness, but I think that this is something that we just need to do. It's our duty to go out there and just sort of educate people on what's going on, because unless you live in it, you don't really see it. So thank you so much for the time. And I look forward to watching your panel here coming up in the near future. Was it November?
Yeah, it's November. It should be fun. The other thing that might be fun to do eventually is like a tabletop exercise with a bunch of people. I've done those in the past and ran those in the past. So everybody gets hands-on experience and sees what their real life options are and what the recommendations would be, and that there's no real wrong or right answer. It's just all about managing risk. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what we can do in the future and helping everybody out. And that's why we're here, just to help.
And this is recorded, and I'm going to take you up on that.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Vernon. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.